Hello everyone, welcome back to the first episode of how to sacrifice in your chess game to create dynamic imbalances, but at the same time to create significant advantage for you to win the game. Now before we even proceed, I want you to tell me what you would do actually in this position if you were playing as black. This is a slightly different position from the actual game, but it still features you how to actually create dynamic imbalances in your game to actually improve your position. Feel free to write it down in the comments below. But this position I got from Dynamic Decision Making in Chess, written by Boris. I believe it was released in 2015-2016. But I first read this book just a couple of years ago. I first came to reading this book expecting some secret to playing more dynamically, so that I won't be so clueless every time I got off the opening phase. But just as expected, chess is too difficult for us to lay down all the secrets and hope that we improve after reading the book. Instead, what this book was all about is a collection of games that look stale and dry, where it seems like there are no breakthrough. But there are actually moves ahead based on a positional understanding that can actually change the course of the game. The downside is that this game is heavily annotated by Boris himself, so it might not be for some beginners learning the fundamentals of chess. But still, I'll recommend this book to anyone who is interested in improving the mid-game play. But nevertheless, if you're not interested in reading, I'll still provide a bite-sized concept where everyone can understand. Now, just to be clear, I'm not paid to actually promote this book to you, I'm just recommending it, so people in general can actually improve their middle gameplay. But without further ado, let's just get into the game. Now, as you can actually see, the game is played in 1979, but there are still ideas that are actually very relevant 40 years into the future, and if you don't mind, I'll just walk you through from the beginning of the game. The game starts out with pawn to e4, and upper pawn c5, we see a very normal rouser variation with knight to c6. Normally in this position, you'll see pawn to a6. This will actually be a knight of position. But with knight to c6, this is actually a rouser variation of Sicilian defense. Now, not getting into much opening theory, this position will have some similarity with that of bishop g5 line from Sicilian Najdorf, where white actually tries to push onto f4, g4, bishop surrendering on g5, pinning down the knight to the queen, and black will be bringing all these pieces on the queen side and actually just attack on the queen side. Now Vitaly continues with queen to d2, and after bishop to e7, castle on the queen side, castle king side, pawn to f4 as we said, beginning to attack on the king side right there, with the pawn push, pawn avalanche, and after pawn h6, now white here continues with knight to f3, and after queen to a5, just a normal developing move for black, and here white continues with bishop to c4. Now I think this is a very strange move in terms of developing your pieces, because after bringing your queen to a5, black will want to play pawn to b5, which he really does in the next move. Now the idea of pawn to b5 in this position is still quite relevant to the modern chess in a way that you want to open up the b file for the rook, so that let's say if your bishop takes, your rook can actually just get in via b8 or c8, placing pressure on the queen side where the white king is actually castled in. There are definitely more ways to actually play against this. Something like king to b1 from white is very possible. Even if pawn were to be pushed to g4, this would still be better than placing a bishop on c4, where it is directly hit by pawn to b5. Now obviously white recaptures, and if he just retreated back, let's say to d3, then there's pawn to b4. This is not going to be very nice. We just let black actually gain control of tempo, and let's say after knight to e2, this pawn on a2 will hang as well. Overall, this position is not good. And so bishop to b5 is just forced. Of course here knight to b5 can be an option as well. Taking the pawn with the bishop is chosen. And after rook to c8, bishop to c4, knight to b4. As you can see, black's trying to bring all these pieces onto the queen side, attacking a2, attacking c2, attacking b2, where the king is currently castled in. Now white in this position plays queen to e2, but take a look at what black does in this position to increase the dynamic chances to actually win the game. Again, feel free to pause the video and write in the comments below to express what you think about in this position. Now black in this position understand that it's attacking c2, attacking a2, attacking b2 potentially. Going further into the future, black might want to play something like bishop to a4 and actually just pressurize on c2. But this bishop is actually being a very good defender on the queen side. And so with all the understanding, black sacrifices the exchange on c4, and after queen takes c4, well, this is still actually defending a2 and c2 technically, but a queen in the chess game is not an ideal piece for the use of defense, as it is higher in value, of course, compared to other pieces. Now black's just going to show you how to do that. Black first move is rook to c8, attacking the queen with tempo, and after queen to b3, it looks like it's protecting a2 and c2, but black continues with the rampage of knight takes e4. Now again, the pawn is protected by the knight here on e4, but by deflecting another defender out of the queen side, now we can actually just play bishop to a4 in this position, attacking the queen, and if the queen has to move, let's say, to e3 or something, then I guess it's already checkmate here by virtue of knight to a2, And let's say if king to b1, we can actually just play some bishop to c2 maybe. With another check, the king is forced to go to a1, and then after knight to c3, it's just checkmate. Queen to a3 does not help the matter because the c2 pawn is still weak. The knight can still come to c2, attacking the queen. And then if queen were to move, let's say to d3 or something, then something like knight to b4, still forking the queen. This king is in check, has to move. And so, of course, white did not take this thing and place pawn to a3. But here black plays another stunning move that you perhaps want to pause and find. But the key move here has to do with the fact that the c file here is actually very exposed. And black here actually plays knight to c2. Just another stunning sacrifice. And the point is, after queen takes c2, which is one of the most obvious choices, we have knight to c3. Again, the pawn cannot take because the rook takes, and this is actually pinning down the queen. The queen will be lost, and so white plays bishop to e1. But even after these few moves, that looks like it is not getting any material advantage. It is clear that black actually gets into white's position first and starts to infiltrate an attack on the queen's side, while the rook on h1 is actually doing nothing, and the bishop on a5 is actually just doing a defensive role. Meanwhile, black has what is called by 4-on-2 advantage, that he can easily push to actually gain a queen, to promote to a queen, while this 2-on-1 is actually nothing because it can be stopped by the rook, and the pawn right here, not to mention the bishop is still there. And so after a sequence of move, where the pawn on a4 might fall, and everything on the king side is actually being protected, let's say pawn to f6, and start to march out all this kingside pawn, Vitaly resigned his position. And so we actually took a look at the framework of sacrificing exchange to gain a dynamic imbalances. And so the general rule of thumb of sacrificing exchange is basically when you want to get rid of the defender of your opponent's king. In this case, the bishop here on c4 is actually a defender of a2 and c2. But let us tweak this game a little bit and say that white did not play queen to e2, which he did in the game, but instead placed bishop to b3. Now the bishop is actually protecting a2 and c2, and there's no sacrifice on c4, so what will black do in this position? Hopefully you saw the answer at the beginning of the game, but the answer is actually still rook to c3 in this position, just getting rid of the defender of the e4 pawn. So after queen to c3, we can just play knight to e4, attacking the queen. After queen to e3, for example, bishop to h4, knight to h4, knight to c5, let's say a3 in this position. After knight to b3, pawn to b3, queen to c7 check. This is still exposing the c2 or the c file actually, along with the king. Of course, another straightforward idea is actually rook to c8, where if the queen moves to e1, let's say we can just play bishop to a4. Another common idea that we just discussed, placing the bishop on a4 to actually pressurize c2. Of course, if pawn to a3 in this position, try to kick out the knight, we can just play bishop to b3, queen b4, and even after this position, you can still argue that black's actually just a bit better. White has a material advantage, but it's really difficult to defend as white in this position. And so yeah, the general rule of thumb is basically when you want to sacrifice an exchange, you want to make sure that you get rid of opponent's defending pieces to then bring your minor pieces to the attack. I just want to bring your attention to one last game before I actually wrap up this video. This game is actually between Boris Spassky and Tigran Petrosian. And again, just to clarify, this is not a Tigran Petrosian that cheated on the Pro Chess League. This is from 1969 World Championship match, and let's just guess what Petrosian actually did here. Recognizing this pawn advantage here that he has on the queen side, Petrosian plays rook to c4, sacrificing exchange here. The idea obviously if knight takes on c4 or even bishop takes c4. Or even bishop to c4, then we'll have pawn takes c4 to recapture, but I also have two pass pawn advantage over here. When I have two pass pawns like that, let's not even talk about the rook, man. I'm even just going to sacrifice a piece to get them rolling, because quite honestly, you perhaps have to sacrifice a piece in order to stop that pawn. I'll take the exchange, but after this position, as you can see, black is really just holding every space on the center of the board. If anything, his plan will be pawn to f5, knight to h6, knight to g4, knight to d6, knight to e4. Moves that fully grabs on the light squares, even with queen to e6 and then infiltrate on the king side, is also very possible from black. In any case, black has a lot of prospect, such that he is actually forced to trade the knight for the rook. And as you can see, the pawn will start to roll. As I highlighted here, the plan will be queen to d6, pawn to b4, and then, just slowly start to push this pawn down the board. But Boris Spassky here played with a blunder first, placed pawn to d5, slightly irrelevant move, and after bishop to d5, rook to d1. This position is a bit kaput. As we can see, all the pawns are marching, the pawn on the king side is taken, and after rook to f2, c2, queen c1, there's no stopping this pawn. Black has a new queen, and even after sacrificing a queen of his own, Boris Spassky did not find the perpetual check, and in this position, Boris Spassky resigned. And I hope this video is actually clear on how to sacrifice an exchange to create dynamic imbalances in your game, and that is when you want to roll out a massive attack on your opponent's king, and when you're trying to get rid of the opponent's piece that is defending the king. And as usual, if you like this video, please press the like button and subscribe button as a support to motivate me to keep going to post this video. Otherwise, thanks for watching. See you soon.